Good afternoon. Welcome to our 2022 Terence R. Keeley Vatican Lecture, brought to you by the Nanovic Institute for European Studies. My name is Clemens Sedmak, and I serve as director of the Nanovic Institute. I'm delighted to welcome you to this lecture. A special word of welcome, of course, to our distinguished speaker, His Excellency Archbishop Gugerotti, and also a special word of welcome to our generous benefactor, Terence Keeley. The Nanovic Institute's mission is quite simple: to bring Europe to Notre Dame and to bring Notre Dame to Europe. For many years, the Nanovic Institute has shown a particular interest in Central and Eastern Europe. We are also very interested in the role of the Catholic Church, or religion more broadly, in Europe. Today's speaker and today's topic reflect this interest, since we have the privilege of welcoming Archbishop Claudio Gugerotti, the Papal Nuncio in London, to give a lecture on the topic, My Contacts with St. John Paul II at the Fall of the Soviet Union. Thank you, dear audience, for being virtually with us. We had planned the Keeley Vatican Lecture as an in-person event. In fact, the planning had reached a stage where we could have provided His Excellency with a detailed itinerary. But with the passing of Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, Archbishop Gugerotti, most understandably, had to give up his plans to visit our campus in order to attend the state funeral. It would have been, of course, an honor and a privilege to host Archbishop Gugerotti here in Notre Dame. But we are very grateful that we live in the 21st century, equipped with the technology that allows for a virtual lecture. One of the good things coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic is the fact that we have gained some experience in organizing events in this format. This is our second virtual Keeley Vatican Lecture. Before I say a few words about our distinguished speaker, please allow me to provide a little bit of background to this marquee event of the Nanovic Institute for European Studies. Our institute was founded through the generosity and foresight of Bob and Liz Nanovic. They love Notre Dame and they love Europe. It was and still is their vision to forge closer ties between the Notre Dame community and Europe through personal encounters, creative research, and formative experiences. The Keeley Vatican Lecture is a particular and significant initiative brought to us by the vision and generosity of Terence Keeley, who is a member of the advisory board of the Nanovic Institute. The lecture is now in its second decade. Terry Keeley's particular vision ensured that when we think about Europe, this includes a focus on the Vatican, on Catholic culture, and Notre Dame's Catholic heritage. Please allow me to add a few remarks about Terry Keeley. Terry Keeley combines in an impressive way education and philosophy with success in the world of finance. He has been an advisor to the world's largest sovereign wealth funds, national pension plans, endowments, foundations, and asset managers for more than 3 decades. In 2021, he was named a leading global knowledge broker by Chief Investment Officer. He just published a book that promises to challenge the way we think about finance, ethics, and the environment. It is a groundbreaking book called Sustainable: Moving Beyond ESG to Impact Investing, published with Columbia Business School Publishing. Just last week, Terry Keeley also just published an article on the thesis of this book in the prestigious and influential Wall Street Journal. On November 3rd, he will deliver the Cahill Lecture in Notre Dame's Mendoza College of Business. It will be wonderful to have Terry Keeley with us on campus. Terence Keeley has also served as a consultant to Pope Francis's Financial Reform Commission. It is through Terry's generosity that we have been able to welcome a number of cardinals and Vatican officials who have offered inspiring lectures. Thank you so much, Terry. Today is another special day in the history of this endowed lecture. Let me please briefly introduce our speaker. I first met Archbishop Gugerotti in 2018 at the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv, when His Excellency served as Papal Nuncio in Ukraine. He impressed me deeply by his warmth and kindness, but also by his brilliance and depth. I refer to him repeatedly in the class on diplomacy that I am teaching. Archbishop Gugerotti is so much more than a diplomat. He's also a theologian, a historian, a linguist, a teacher, and a shepherd. Claudio Gugerotti was born in Verona, Italy, and ordained a priest of the Diocese of Verona 40 years ago in 1982. Congratulations to this anniversary.
Thank you.
He studied Eastern languages and sacred liturgy and was a professor of patristics, Eastern liturgy, at the Institute of Ecumenical Studies in Verona from 1981 to 1985. In the same year, 1985, he was appointed as an official working at the Congregation for the Eastern Churches, and he became its undersecretary in 1997. He has also taught at the Pontifical Oriental Institute. In 2001, Pope St. John Paul II appointed him Apostolic Nuncio to Georgia and to Armenia, and later also to Azerbaijan. Pope Benedict XVI appointed him Apostolic Nuncio to Belarus in 2011, and Pope Francis appointed him Apostolic Nuncio to Ukraine in 2015. And this is when we met for the first time. Pope Francis named Archbishop Claudio Gugerotti as Apostolic Nuncio to Great Britain on Saturday, 4th of July, 2020. Welcome, Your Excellency. Thank you so much for being with us. Archbishop Gugerotti will speak for about 45 minutes. So that's the plan, 45 minutes. And we have some time for questions. We will end after 75 minutes, which is 1:45 US Eastern Time to respect everybody's schedule. Please feed your questions through the Google form, and we will then hand them over to His Excellency. May I now please invite you, Archbishop Gugerotti, to give the 2022 Keeley Vatican Lecture, My Contacts with St. John Paul II at the Fall of the Soviet Union. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for these warm words. And sorry again for not being present. You justified me already. First of all, let me express my deep gratitude for your kind invitation to offer this year's Keeley Vatican Lecture, especially to the President of the University of Notre Dame, Father John Jenkins, and to Mr. Clement Sedmak for the warm welcome and introduction. I thank Monica Caro and Rebecca Prince for their assistance and support, especially when I requested for this lecture to take place via Zoom, which allowed me to attend the state funeral of Her late Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II. I also thank all who work, live, and study at Notre Dame. To those who are present online and express their kind welcome, I am most grateful. In this lecture, I thought it would be useful to share with you some of the contacts I had with the Holy Father John Paul II in the context of the final years of the Soviet Union. They are not known to the public, so this is the first time you hear them. Anybody hears them. And they seem to me to be very significant of the sensitivity of that pontiff, son of the Polish people, and an internal witness to the communist history. It is the 7th of December, 1988. The then Soviet Socialist Republic of Armenia suffers a disastrous earthquake. Officially, there are 20,000 dead, but in practice, it turns out to be many more. At that time, I'm a priest, 33 years old, and an official of the Congregation for the Oriental Churches in the Vatican. Caritas Italy, the organization of the Italian Church for Charity, decides on an on-site visit by its director, Monsignor Giuseppe Pasini, with some collaborators. We are still in the Soviet Union, so it is necessary to obtain the required permits and follow the established air routes. The Caritas delegation has heard that there is an Italian priest who has studied Armenia, namely me, and asked for me to join the group. Cardinal Casaroli, then Secretary of State, informs me that the departure is scheduled for the next day. I believe only the ongoing emergency allowed a young man from the Roman Curia, lacking the high diplomatic experience that characterized those who were sent from Rome to the Soviet bloc in those days, the days of the Ostpolitik, to be allowed to leave. When we landed, we drove to the city of Leninakan, today Gyumri, while an unimaginable ruin appeared before our eyes. People and state services are working hard to extract victims from the rubble, but there are few means available. We are struck by the fact that the older houses have held up better, while the taller buildings built in Brezhnev's time crumble like sand or open up, leaving only stumps in full, revealing the family life that has just died. It is very cold, about 11 degrees below zero. We are welcomed by the Catholicos, the head of the Armenian Apostolic Church, in their residential citadel of Ecumenical. On the street, around the perimeter of the earthquake, we meet Mother Teresa of Calcutta, also among the survivors and amidst immense piles of empty coffins. She has also come to visit in order to see how to help. Her nuns, probably thanks to the intervention of Gorbachev's wife, Raisa, managed to obtain permission to establish themselves in Armenia and Georgia as an exception to the still restrictive rules about the presence of religious, especially if Catholic and foreign. When journalists approach her car, Mother Teresa replies, "For pity's sake, this is not the time to photograph me." When we return at night to Ecumenical, the impression is that the disaster is enormous and that towns like Leninakan and Spitak are stricken to death. Survivors are taken in by relatives or in the military tent camps set up on site and in the main squares of the cities. One man asks for a Bible, saying, "They brought us material aid, but we cannot find Bibles." A little girl, Astrid, meaning little star, tells us that she left school a few minutes before the end of class. Her classmates are all dead. In the morning, we celebrate Mass with Armenian vestments that the Catholicos has made available to us, along with the chapel where Orthodox Armenians were baptized in Ecumenical. Some deacons from the local seminary, from the window, watch Mother Teresa praying with one of her sisters. On our return to Italy, we are told, quite unexpectedly, that the next day, Pope John Paul II invites us to dinner. We meet him for the first time, not for a quick hello, but for a long evening sharing. The Pope is pensive, but asks many questions about what we have seen. He's struck by the stories of that immense tragedy, but we realize that human and pastoral interest is interwoven with a special attention due to the fact that we are talking about the Soviet Union, a world that is well known to him and which, in his Poland, had the essential political reference point in those times. From that evening on, the Pope will give us special attention. For me, it will be the beginning of an unexpected and unprecedented relationship, which will accompany me until the Pontiff's death, and which will deeply mark my life. Caritas Italy collects 13 billion lira, the current currency in Italy. Italy will be among the first to break the bureaucratic barrier of the Soviet world to build an entire village in the earthquake zone, which still exists, the Italia village. But the solidarity race is international. Very interesting event, totally unexpected, that for the first time made the barrier of communism collapse in front of international solidarity. For our group of Caritas Italy, however, it will not be easy to allocate the large sum collected. It seems that the Armenian leaders at that time do not even realize how international aid can be managed. The proposals they make to us are totally inadequate. Buy computers for the various ministries, start an ice cream parlor on the spot, etc. At the proposal of the ice cream parlor, Monsignor Pezzini hits me with his foot under the table. I understand that he expects me to make a strong intervention because he is convinced that we are being taken for a ride. For the umpteenth time, we explain that these are humanitarian initiatives to alleviate the suffering of those affected. Our interlocutor replies unperturbed. But the earthquake children like ice creams too. It is only then that we realize how profound the concrete difference in understanding and managing social life is between us Europeans and the Soviets. Although Armenia enjoys a certain autonomy, also due to its deep national consciousness. We also understand, quite to our astonishment, what distance, despite the dominant ideology, there is between the political leaders and the simple people. From that moment on, I will be in charge of numerous trips to increase contacts and finally find a humanitarian destination for the funds collected before they get lost in circuitous routes. We will also invite Deputy Prime Minister Dayan to Rome. He meets Indian Cardinal Lurdusamy, then prefect of the Congregation for the Oriental Churches. And then the Holy Father, at the end of a celebration in St. Peter's. Very interesting experience. It was the first time he went to a Catholic church, and maybe the first time he went to a church whatsoever. He couldn't understand what was taking place, what a mass was. Particularly interesting for him was the time when people received communion. And he asked me, what are they doing? Quite a very, very difficult diplomatic situation. If you say that they are eating bread, you would not understand. If I say that they are eating the body of Christ, it would be even worse. So I just smile and say it's part of the celebration. The meeting is brief but significant at the Chapel of Mercy, where the Pietà is. The Pope arrives And Mr. Dayan begins to thank him for the help he is providing to his people. The politician addresses the Pope in Russian. At the end of his short speech, the Pope, with a slight smile, tells him also in Russian, «По-русски я читаю и понимаю, но я не говорю». I read and understand Russian, but I do not speak it. It was very clear from then on that an Armenian translator was necessary. My trips follow one another frequently, but without any concrete results. On each return, the Pope wants to meet us and hear our stories personally. So, just wanted to explain that was a completely parallel work that had nothing to do with my being an official of the Congregation of the Eastern Churches. As he had promised us for the Christmas holidays, he had launched an appeal for Armenian relief. Each time he asked about the Armenian Apostolic Church and how it had received us. And each time we reassured him that we had been treated with great kindness and that each time the Catholicos had asked us to bring his greetings to the Pope. Imagine Soviet Union after centuries of isolation. After many months, our unfortunate group attempted another trip to Armenia, also that time with lots of information, but little chance of concrete engagement. A little disappointed, and by now tired, we spend an afternoon in the hotel where we are staying. Right there, totally unexpectedly, I meet a journalist from my native Italian city, Verona, an employee of the local newspaper, L'Arena, Mr. Bruno Panziera. He tells me that the newspaper has also promoted a fundraising campaign, and with the results is building a school in a remote area of the country, particularly forgotten by aid. He wonders if we want to accompany him to visit it. Always on the desperate lookout for new opportunities, we accept. One of the monks from the Armenian Mechitarist congregation of St. Lazarus, based in Venice, accompanies us as a translator. After a very long drive, we arrive practically at the border with Georgia, at an altitude of 2,500 meters, in the region then called Rukasyan, now Ashotsk. As soon as we get out of the car, seeing that we were priests, a person approaches us and asks who we were and where we were from. Of course, our faces were a little bit exotic. Unfortunately, we have not had a priest for 60 years, they said, but here we are all Catholics. Gradually, the news spread and people start to arrive. The first secretary of the Communist Party also arrives and tells us, I too am Catholic. Quite strange for a Soviet bureaucrat. They immediately take us to visit their churches. In some, they meet every Sunday, put the cassock of the last priest on the altar, and sing the hymns that have been passed down from generation to generation. They tell me, the hardest thing for us is not being able to have the priest's blessing for weddings and funerals. In another little chapel, closed. There is an image of the Pope, another one of the Catholicos, and some handkerchiefs hanging from the ceiling, according to a pre-Christian custom widespread in the East up to now. Secretly, I managed to get from a friend a black and white film with photos of some Catholic churches in the area. Without having imagined it, we discovered a place where the majority of Armenian Catholics of Armenia had survived. A part more organized is also across the border, the Georgian border, in the areas of Akhaltsike and Akhalkalaki. The emotion, as you understand, is great for all of us, but especially for the Armenian priest, to whom everyone immediately turns for a blessing. On my return to Rome, the meeting with the Pope is truly extraordinary. He too is deeply touched and listens to all the details of the description. At the end, I show him the photos of the churches that still exist. The Pope gets up and kisses them one by one. Now, those people had to be given a pastor. But how to do that in Soviet Union? The destination of the Caritas funds was finally identified. A hospital would be built for the earthquake victims with totally free treatment. The Chameleon's fathers will take charge of it, and the Italian church will continue to support it for years. It is still working nowadays. A little sister of Jesus, Sister Noel, whom I met by chance at Yerevan airport, after having spent long years among the Armenians in Lebanon, will be the first to enter the hospital and will remain there for many, many years, flanked for some time by another sister. It is located at an altitude of 2,700 meters in an area almost always covered by snow. It will be called Redemptoris Mater Hospital after the encyclical letter of Pope John Paul II, but for everyone, it will be and still is the Pope's hospital. I am instructed to discreetly make contact with Catholicos Vasken I. With him, I address the question of a priest for the Armenian Catholics. I immediately find him well disposed, but he is very clear in indicating to me the group from which to choose the new pastor. The Methodist monks of Venice, well known for their spiritual and cultural work for the Armenians and on good terms with the Armenian Apostolic Church. Another extraordinary thing is that he declares himself ready to invite the priest as soon as he is found. And so it happens. A Methodist monk of about 70 years of age, with only one lung, arrives from Aleppo at a prohibitive time for Armenia, at the waning of the Soviet Union, with the tragedy of the earthquake still almost unresolved, and during the war in Nagorno-Karabakh. He will remain there until his death. His sense of humor was very helpful to him, in spite of the lack of electricity, heating, and sometimes food. He will die in a similar way. He went to the hospital to have good dinner. After that, he went to take a shower. And singing, he died in the shower. In the meantime, the Pope plans to create a small local hierarchy. Who to put in charge? The priests from that area have been dead for a long time. Attention then falls on another Majesterist monk, Father Narcisse der Narcissian, also in his 70s, Superior General of the community. And there, a new exceptional occurrence takes place. That monk is originally from Romania, where his father was a priest of the Armenian Apostolic Church, whose bishop was then that Vasken, who later became Catholicos of all Armenians, and who was in front of me. The Catholicos, because of a complex affair that had involved the family of Father Narcisse der Narcissian, was particularly fond of him, whom he had known as a very young man, and several times, unfortunately to no avail, had invited him, when he had become a monk and a Catholic monk, to teach in the seminary of Ecumenical at the height of the communist era. The Pope sent me to ask the Catholicos what he thought of this. He immediately replied in the affirmative and added, "Until he finds a place to live, he will be my guest in the apartment that belongs to me." Father Narcisse reminisced at length about his evening talks with the Catholicos. The next step is to create an ordinariate, which will be called of the Catholic Armenians of Eastern Europe. We avoided the word Soviet Union, of course, and it was a prophecy because after a short time, Soviet Union would not exist any longer. And it is necessary to give it a bishop. The Pope decides that it should be Father Narcisse der Narcissian himself. However, after so many steps, it does not seem easy to obtain the agreement of the Armenian Apostolic Church and of the local authorities on such an important and public step. Again, I'm sent to Armenia. The meeting with the Catholicos is very brief. I explain with a certain, fear, the Holy Father's intention to the Catholicos and await his reaction. The Catholicos asks me, who will be the new Archbishop? I tell him, the Pope would have chosen a person he knows is very dear to you, Father Narcisse der Narcissian. The elderly Catholicos is silent for a moment, smiles, and then tells me, I thought you had made him a bishop already. Thank God, the long affair had been resolved, yes, with some external difficulties, but in a way unique among the Eastern Catholic churches of a former Soviet country. It was Pope John Paul II himself who conferred episcopal ordination on the new Archbishop in an Armenian liturgy in St. Peter's Basilica, celebrated by the Armenian Catholic Patriarch Hovhannes Bedros, the 18th Kasparian. The Archbishop would remain in his post for 15 years, because although the prelate resigned at the age of 75, the Pope kept him in office until his death at the age of 86. John Paul II will visit Armenia in 2001 and will be hosted in the personal apartment of the new Catholicos still in office, His Holiness Karakin II. It will be an unforgettable visit and a truly fraternal meeting. The Pope took me with him on the trip. In the meeting with the Catholicos and his entourage, John Paul II left aside the text they had prepared for him to read and said, among other things, "Your Holiness, a classmate of mine in Poland was Armenian, and I have a great veneration for the last Armenian Catholic Archbishop of Lviv, now Ukraine, who was a great Armenian and a great Polish patriot, Archbishop Teodorovich. I apologize," continued the Pope, "if I only knew Armenian Catholics. But when I became a Pope, the meeting with Armenians took place very frequently, and I had the opportunity to prepare for this visit with many readings of Armenian church fathers that he, and he made me blush, pointed out to me. At this point, I thought I would make public in this university another episode which preceded the Pope's visit to Armenia. He had struck up a great friendship, cordially reciprocated, with the predecessor of Catholicos Karakin II, Catholicos Karakin I, another very strange history. Karakin I was the Armenian Catholicos of Cilicia in Lebanon, and the two Catholicosates were not on very good terms, mainly for political reasons. Then he was elected the Catholicos of Ecumenical, so he moved from Turkey, originally Turkey, now Beirut, to Armenia. There were many occasions for them to meet, and the Pope's visit was planned precisely during the ministry of Karakin I. Unfortunately, however, the latter was stricken with a terrible throat cancer, which took away the voice of a man who was well known as a famous orator, and he knew it very well and was very proud of it. They met again at the Vatican for the inauguration of an exhibition of Armenian artifacts. I was greatly moved by the emotion of the ailing Catholicos when he met the Pope, already advanced in the illness that undermined his physique to the point of death. In the episode I will now recount, I am involved at the time as the consultor of the office for the liturgical celebrations of the Supreme Pontiff. Preparations are being made for the trip to Armenia, and the necessary material is being prepared for the liturgies that will take place there. But it is not certain whether the Catholicos' health will allow the visit to take place. News soon arrives that the bishops of the Armenian Synod consider the Catholicos' health condition too serious for such a complex event to take place. It is 1999. Pope John Paul II is visiting Poland from the 5th to the 7th of June. Archbishop Hajat Barsamian, the Armenian primate of the Eastern Diocese of the Armenian Church of America, arrives in Rome to bring the news of the postponed visit. We had been fellow students at the Pontifical Oriental Institute in Rome. The Archbishop described the truly desperate condition of Catholicos Karakin I. He intended to let the Pope know. What did we do? All the superiors were together with the Pope in Poland. So we telephoned his secretary, Bishop Stanislaw Dziwisz, he himself with the Pope in Poland. In that conversation, a novel idea arises. Perhaps the Pope will agree to extend his journey from Poland to Armenia to bid farewell to his friend and brother Catholicos. Something absolutely unprecedented. The idea seems very risky and arouses to many people some perplexity. But John Paul II agrees. He asked to meet Archbishop Gugerotti in Poland the day after. He took the plane and arrives, to the dismay of the papal retinue, and meets the Pope. The latter, without explanations and without letting the Archbishop speak, immediately tells him, "I am going to say goodbye to the Catholicos." The visit is also announced by the Vatican Press Office to general astonishment, except that the Pope sleeps in the bathroom and suffers a small gaze on his head. The doctors advise him to avoid the exertion of a further strenuous journey. So the Pope is forced to return to Rome. Everyone thinks that the meeting in Armenia will never happen. On the evening of the day after his return, John Paul II invites me to dinner. He briefly describes what happened and asks me, "How long does it take to fly from Rome to Armenia?" I answer, "About 3 hours, Your Holiness." The Pope replies, "Let us see if we can organize this flight." Evidently, he had not resigned himself to giving up this personal gesture, which was also the sign of an incredible ecumenical faith. Knowing the Catholicos' condition, I asked the Pope to allow me to check if Karakin I was still able to receive guests. I telephoned Archbishop Gugerotti in America, who told me that the Catholicos was in his final hours and that he was in no condition to receive any visit. I told the Holy Father, who was very saddened. But he decided to prepare and sign a letter to be sent to the Catholicos immediately. In it, he expressed in a very personal and vibrant tone his friendship, but above all, his faith in the path of fraternity that the two churches had taken in those years, and of which I had been so lucky as to see the results. Karakin died on the 29th of June, 1999. The delegation from the Holy See, appointed by the Pope to attend the funeral in Ecumenical, consisting of Cardinal Walter Kasper, Bishop Mark Ouellet, and myself, was entrusted with the delivery of that letter. Before the coffin was closed, the letter was placed between the hands of the late Catholicos. It was a sign that the spirituality of communion between the churches had an extraordinary symbolic value. And I was moved thinking that many of the contexts that brought to their conclusion had been realized in my presence, such a young priest with no experience. Here are some of the events I experienced with the Holy Father, Pope John Paul II. I have related them to shed further light on the passion for freedom that he showed once he experienced the harshness of the atheist regime and the attention he paid to the period of the end of the Soviet Union. If other high political authorities of the world had done the same at the time, and with the same knowledge, probably the following years would have been much different. During Mikhail Gorbachev's visit to the Vatican on the 1st of December 1989, the document that was delivered to him mentioned the request to normalize the life of the Catholic churches in the Soviet Union. In the first draft, the Latin and Greek Catholic churches were mentioned, but after the events that had just occurred, the Armenian one was also added, of which certain news had just arrived, while earlier in the dossier of the Secretariat of State, there was only mention of the possible existence of Armenian Catholics whose number and whereabouts were unknown. I will conclude with two expressions that relate to our theme and that can better understand how the protagonists themselves experience the role of John Paul II in relation to the communist world. When I told the Holy Father of the widespread conviction that his pontificate had been decisive in the fall of the Soviet communist regime, he replied with a smile, "Don't exaggerate. It was already destroyed from within." Edward Shevardnadze, who had just returned to his native Georgia after having been Gorbachev's foreign minister during the Soviet Union, of course, told me one day when I was already the local Apostolic Nuncio, "The Pope is for me the greatest figure of the century, the 20th. If he had not received me during the uprisings in Poland, perhaps there would have been great bloodshed. I was sent by Gorbachev to see him, and I told him that the Politburo had already decided to send tanks, and I asked him to go to Poland to avert the danger of an armed uprising." And he continued, "It would have been the end for the country. The Pope," and then Shevardnadze smiled, "who even made me wait a day before letting me know that he would receive me, averted that danger in Poland and marked a turning point in history." May God protect, through his intercession, those places where the tragedy of what is happening today is maybe also best understood from what I tried to describe today. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Dear Archbishop Gugerotti, thank you so much for this wonderful lecture, this personal narrative, where you speak both to the personal and to the political. And we feel really very privileged that you share for the first time those experiences you had with St. John Paul II. Thank you so much. Dear audience, there is now the opportunity to ask questions. The first questions have come in. Your Excellency, if I may start with one question that was asked by Professor Dobko, who is the Senior Vice Rector of the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv. You may, of course, know him.
Yes.
And his question is this: December 2022 will mark 100 years of the creation of the Soviet Union. For more than 30 years, we are living in the world without the Soviet Union. But the Soviet lifestyle has survived in many people's minds, including religious believers. There are many who experience nostalgia for the Soviet reality. Have you come across this nostalgia during your service in Eastern Europe? Is it harmless or not? How is it lived out by people, including Christian faithful, and how is it exploited for the revisionist politics in the region? That's the question of Professor Dobko.
Well, that's quite a considerable question. Yes, I got across very frequently with that feeling during my services to Armenia, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Ukraine, and Belarus. particularly among, let us say, not very young people. It was quite widespread for the very clear reasons that they perceived that at the time they had not to think too much and everything was provided, however, in not a very brilliant way. And we cannot deny that some achievements took place, that the people started to read and write, because a lot of people in the former Soviet Union could not read and write before that. But a certain assistance was given to the people, without, at least officially, allowing somebody to become extremely rich and all the others extremely poor, which exactly happened with the fall of Soviet Union. And we Westerners, we don't know about that. We think that after the fall of Soviet Union, it was a smooth, pleasant passage to democracy and to a kind of solidarity with the Western world. Nothing of this kind. Nothing. People were queuing up from 3 o'clock in the morning to get a slice of bread. Everything has been given or sold, apparently, to some former members of the bureaucracy of the Soviets. And they became extremely rich, as my friend knows perfectly well, because of the oligarchs, who are a bigger problem in Ukraine as well. So, you know, this extreme difference that has been created brought them to desire the onions of Egypt. And it is almost to be taken for granted. In younger people, memories are not so strong. They are more used to getting in touch with the other world, however, with very strict limitations, particularly during this present period. So a certain desire for trying to live the same style of life as the Westerners became very important, and in a certain number, also a desire for freedom. The problem has been, and still is, the problem of personal initiative, taking decisions, being ready in showing a strong desire and to build something. Ukraine has been particularly lucky in having various moments of collective involvement in this kind of initiative. The problem is everyday life. So the potential idea of creating something free. My friend certainly remembers when they attempted to approve a law about the distribution of land. Many of the people were afraid that some oligarchs would soon swallow all those small parts of land and they will become even poorer. So at the same time, and we are the witness of that, a certain idea of revanchism and imperialism continued to exist and was in a way, and became once again, because it was not created at the time, part of the identity of the Russian Federation up to now. Can it be dangerous? I don't think so. It is terribly dangerous for the result we see every day. It's difficult to imagine to go back to the Soviet times after experiencing a different mentality and a different world, in spite of all the limits of a propaganda that hammers the head of all the people of those countries. I don't think it is possible, but certainly we shall have to pay a very high price for promoting a different world, and we need a big amount of imagination and faith in order to see what to do, with whom to do, and to distinguish people we can trust upon and people we cannot trust.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency. A more personal question. As a priest and official of the Vatican, you of course knew John Paul II before you got closer to him. When you had this very privileged access to St. John Paul II, were you surprised by his personality, or was this what you expected?
You know, everything was unexpected, because I worked for John Paul II for some years before, but he was the Pope. I was just somebody who worked at the congregation. So my contacts were more with the people, the Oriental people, than with the Pope, apart from one occasion when he had to celebrate an Armenian liturgy, and I was the master of ceremonies during that occasion. And I remember that Monsignor Dziwisz at the time told me, try them not to be too long, please. And I said it should be 2 hours and a half. 2 hours and a half, but nothing more. It was 3 hours and a half almost. And when we went to the sacristy, the Pope said, no, the Pope, Dziwisz said, oh, it was too long. I said, Your Holiness, you know, when the Orientals start singing, you never know when they finish. And he laughed and he said, you gave me 3 hours of paradise. And then he said, but I think I pronounced the Armenian words very poorly. I think I made a lot of mistakes. I said, Your Holiness, but the Catholic Church says that you don't commit mistakes. So he laughed. And that was the first meeting, which happened some time before the events that I have spoken about. What I found in John Paul II, absolutely new, is the sense of humor. He seemed also very pensive, you know, a real leader, but he could be extremely, how can I say, he smiled, he said jokes, of course, jokes with a specific tinge that maybe were difficult for us to understand, and vice versa. But that was one aspect. The second aspect was the changing in his attitude. When he arrived, his main goal was to preach the faith in order to put an end to the communist era. When he started moving around, he realized that even capitalism was not the best of the world. And that shows also the difference in the social encyclicals that you will find afterwards. So I assisted slowly to the opening of new horizons in the mentality, already very, very open, of John Paul II. We have to remember that John Paul II, when he was a bishop in Poland, he was considered a little bit of an exotic creature. His love for the students, his love for sports, and so on and so forth. And probably the communists thought that they could do something with him. But unfortunately for us, that did not happen.
Thank you. Thank you. We got another question. Your Excellency, thank you so much for this extraordinary sharing of your story. You mentioned the communist official attending the Mass and how you responded about the Eucharist. Could you please speak to how Vatican diplomacy and the role of priests in diplomatic positions perhaps facilitates, affects diplomatic relations? Is it uniquely helpful?
Oh, that is difficult because I didn't belong to diplomacy. You know, the diplomats were the famous Cardinal Casaroli, Silvestrini, and others. Some are still alive. The perception of people, I think, was a little bit altered. They received the impression that they were speaking with the communists in order to get some results, but at the expense of the local Christian Catholic community. And this is not true. Everything was in touch with those who were available, because some of them, like the Ukrainian ones, were in Gulag and it was very difficult to do that. The book written by Cardinal Gugerotti, which is available, has a particular title, The Martyrdom of Patience. That, I think, is the attitude. I don't have the impression, knowing Cardinal Gugerotti very well, that he wanted to sell some of the Catholic faith or faithful to the communists. On the contrary, when the first Apostolic Nuncio to the community of the independent states at the fall of Soviet Union spoke with me during the night in a train from Moscow to Lviv, he told me the conditions we tried to elect bishops, or at least administrators, were absolutely incredible. We took the priest in the same room, one behind the heating system, the other behind a curtain, and we gave them the questions to see who could be the person. And then we had to discuss it with, so they consulted the priests. Then they had the terrible work and job of going to speak with the communist bureaucrats. And many of these persons were excluded, but we continued and continued and continued. Maybe one or two were inserted in order to give the possibility to have at least one of the bishops appointed, but these people were not followed by the faithful. They understood that that was the price imposed on the Vatican in order to allow the ordination of 7, 8, or 9 priests. Mm-hmm. So by studying the papers and listening to them, I have never had the impression that they wanted to come on terms of, I'm going to say, condescendence with the communist state. But this is always the problem with the Vatican diplomacy. We see what is described and what the media convey. We don't see what happens behind. And also sometimes the terrible struggles we have with some, or we had with some of these people. Yeah. But we smiled when it came out, because it was not possible to destroy the least possibility for the faithful to receive the least of the freedoms granted in that incredible system.
Thank you.
This is my impression.
Thank you. We have a very short question. You will enjoy that. Could you please elaborate on the statement, the Soviet Union was destroyed from within?
I should ask what he meant, what the Pope meant.
Exactly.
But my impression during our discussion was that John Paul II was convinced that financially it was over.
Okay.
A lot of money had been spent for weapons and for rockets and for all these things. But the real reason was the moral life had fallen completely. There was no motivation. There was no idea why they should continue in that way in many people. Mm-hmm. I cannot say that he meant in everybody. It would be, he knew the situation too well, just to imagine that all the peoples were ready just to put an end to the Soviet era. But he was particularly sure that for various reasons, mainly for the role of the churches, however strange and complicated that role was, and contradictory sometimes, had given them a curiosity towards a different kind of world they could imagine for the first time as possible, in spite of the fact that the communists could not describe a different world from theirs. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. As it is very clear, because when somebody was against the power, sometimes he was put into a psychiatrical asylum. Yeah. And the reason is very clear. If you want to create heaven on earth, and these people are against, it means that they are crazy. That was the mentality. When they started thinking that maybe it was possible and they were not crazy, then the end of Soviet Union already started.
Thank you. We have at least 3 more questions and we have 10 minutes left. So we will see. A question from a colleague from Notre Dame. Eastern Catholicism is somewhat unknown among American Catholics. How should a university such as Notre Dame deepen our students' appreciation for Eastern Catholicism and Eastern Catholics?
Well, my impression is that Notre Dame is not totally alien to that. I think you had an Institute of Byzantine Studies also in your university, where, in fact, my friend Father Taft was a professor.
Yeah.
So you're working already on it. The first point is that I would recommend the university to insist, first of all, on the very Eastern Christianity, because it is a different system of thought and a different approach to the faith, which is absolutely important if we want to speak normally and with historical roots about the identity of Christianity nowadays. We cannot ignore the enormous number of believers that followed another tradition, and maybe we can find some inspiration for our way of living Christianity today, instead of thinking that all our problems started the day before yesterday, and we are the geniuses that succeed in finding an answer who nobody else had in the past.
Yeah.
So knowing ancient and present Christianity in the East is the first point.
Yeah.
The second point is to identify the specific, precise, how can I say, description of the Eastern Catholics as part of the Eastern Christianity in contact and in communion with the Catholic Church. Sometimes it can be disappointing, but very many times it's very enriching. So Eastern Catholicism in the context of Eastern Christianity, that is a must.
Thank you, thank you. An anonymous question where I could not tell you who posed it. It's a polite question, no worries, no worries. Do you know how Pope John Paul II viewed the idea of Christian reunification and the timeline for moving toward this reunification? What do you see as Pope John Paul II's greatest contribution to this front?
He was a strong believer in reunification, but not only because he was a saint, but also because we were in a period where we had the impression that ecumenism was moving on very concretely. So what I described, for example, however episodical, permits us now to live with the Armenian Church an absolutely unique relationship of friendship and fraternity, as the Pope Francis showed by declaring Saint Gregory of Narek as Doctor of the Church. So, the impression is that now we are confronting a situation where pessimism is overwhelming. And this reason is not particularly a religious reason, it is a political reason. It is the fact that all churches are strictly linked with their perception of politics in their own areas. But in the East, the link of the churches with their state and with their own people and history, however mythical or real it is particularly strong. So the problem of the crisis of ecumenism is not merely a problem of faith. It is a problem of a new tension, international political tension, which has not seen anything similar after the Second World War. So if you want to understand the reaction of religions, please consider the political context where they work. It's not a problem of thinking they are guilty or not guilty, but you must understand before judging.
Thank you so much. The Keeley Vatican Lecture is hosted by the Nanovic Institute for European Studies, and our institute is part of the KIO School of Global Affairs. So this will probably be our last question that basically reflects, our European studies and policy aspect. The question is this: Notre Dame President Father John Jenkins has described you, Your Excellency, as an advocate for the Church's diplomatic positions on some of Europe's most pressing challenges. Can you touch on what Europe's most pressing challenges are today from your perspective and from that of the Church, and how a papal nuncio can go about advocating the Church's position with European leaders and policymakers today?
Well, this very question could take the whole time of the conference.
I know, you have 3 minutes, Your Excellency.
Yeah, well, imagine an Italian having such limits. It's impossible. Well, my impression is that the first problem with Europe is ignorance. We don't know each other's history, one another's history, mentality, culture. So we speak different languages and we think that there is a mutual understanding. It's impossible. You must know exactly to whom you are speaking if you want to have a language in common, which does not mean that you have to stroke the person very delicately and always smile. But the problem is to be sure that when you convey a message, the message is understood. And before, you have to be sure that you have understood what you want to convey and realized if it is possible to convey it, or you must put in such a way to make it acceptable, even in a way which is difficult for yourself. This is the main reason. Insults, this kind of explosion of rage has nothing to do with diplomacy. Diplomacy is not the art of being stupid, which means that you always smile simply because you think that that is good for the interlocutor.
Yeah.
But diplomacy needs long time in studying and reading literature, history, liturgy, essays that are typical of the area where you work. This is being lost not only by the people in general, by the diplomats themselves in particular. The diplomats nowadays tend to be more businessmen than real politicians or experts, I would say, of political philosophy. This is my impression. As long as we don't discover, particularly through the universities are the most formidable instrument we have to create a critical approach.
Thank
even
you.
to the media, because the media are bought. There are people who pay for expressing certain opinions, not in all cases, of course. The university is the place. As long as the university is a universitas, a vision of the whole, and not a specialized, point of my pen in order to say that this is what I know and all the rest I can be ignorant of.
That's a wonderful way to end our conversation, Your Excellency, reminding the University of Notre Dame of its mission. We are at time. Thank you so much, dear Archbishop Gugerotti, for a very moving and brilliant and personal lecture and your graciousness in the Q&A session. Dear all, thank you so much for participating and for your questions. This has been a virtual event, and we owe a lot of gratitude to our tech and communications team to make this possible. Tim Checkley, Grant Osborne, Becca Prince, Grania McEvoy, thank you so much. I would also like to thank Terry Keeley and his family for the generous support of our signature event, the Keeley Vatican Lecture. Many thanks again, Your Excellency. Warm greetings to London. All of you, a good afternoon and goodbye from the campus of Notre Dame. Thank you
very much. All the best to you and all the blessing of the Lord on your institution and your people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Archbishop.